and nothing. Well, yes. Good evening, good afternoon, Phil Crozier from England. Hello.
Hello.
The brand ambassador of Wines of Argentina to Europe. And good afternoon to you from Poland and supposedly from Argentina as well. And before we start, I'd like to pass the floor to the ambassador of the Republic of Argentina in Poland, Mrs. Ana Maria Ramirez. Mrs. Ambassador.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Embassy of Argentina, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to the celebration of Malbec Day. The Embassy is very grateful to Mr. Phil Crozier. We are very fortunate to have him one more time. You know him very well. I would like also to welcome and to say thank you to Mr. Piotr Pietrzyk and to Sandra Stilko. You know Piotr from the previous edition, and Sandra, she's the assistant of the commercial department here at the embassy. Piotr and Sandra worked together very hard and restless in order to put all the pieces, or better say, to put all the bottles in front of us. I wish you, all of you who are here in Warsaw, in Krakow, in Poznan, in other many cities around Poland, to enjoy this evening, and we are very much looking forward to our next edition, 2023. Enjoy and salud.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words. And well, this is the third time with Phil Crozier, so you know him really very well. But this is the first word, Malbec word today. Yes, we celebrate today. And Phil, I pass the floor to you, and this is your show.
Okay, thank you. Well, firstly, I'd like to echo the sentiments about Sandra. Sandra pulls her hair out every time that we do these, in organising all of the samples coming from Argentina and all the paperwork and all the mistakes that are made. And also Peter for working with Sandra so well in getting the samples here. It's not easy to get samples anywhere in the world at the moment, and it takes us a little while, and thankfully they take all the stress, so that all I have to do is put together this presentation for you. And I would also like to thank the wineries too for taking part, and Ambassador Ramirez, thank you so much for your introduction. So I'm going to start first of all just to tell you a little bit about myself, if you don't know already. I've spent, what is it now? It must be 23 years now with Argentine wine. I worked for a restaurant group in the UK called Gaucho, who had 4 or 5 restaurants at the time, and they asked me to take a look at the wine list. I didn't know very much about wine at that time, so I'm not quite sure why they did that, but they did it. And in my naivety, I decided that all of the wines should be all from Argentina. Now, this was in 1999, at a time when Argentine wines were just beginning to come into the market. I don't think Argentina would have even registered as a 1% of the UK market at that time. There were 13 wineries exactly available in the market, because I rang up every single importer in the UK and asked them if they get anything from Argentina. And so I did this list with about 25 wines. And strangely, Malbec didn't even really feature on the wine lists then. It was not even so connected with Argentina at that time. I had Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, lots of oxidized Torrontés, and eventually, as we grew as a restaurant company, we grew to 18 restaurants in the end. By the time I left in 2018, I made a few decisions along the way, which I think really helped to cement Argentina in the UK market, and also to cement Malbec in the consciousness of the buying public in the UK. One of the things I did was, I think it was in 2007, I put a menu together which was only with Malbec from different regions within Argentina, going from north of Argentina to the south of Argentina. And when I show you maps later, it'll become quite logical as to why I did that. And I called it Super Malbec. I don't know why I did that. I think it was a dream that I might have had after watching a Batman or a Superman movie or something like this. But I called it Super Malbec, and they were sort of very premium Malbecs, probably very oaky, big, extracted Malbecs at that time. They became, well, incredibly popular. I mean, we were turning over maybe £2 or £3 million on just that menu alone. And so by the time I left, I think we had around 100 Malbecs in that section of the menu, and it kind of became something that people used to come to our restaurants for, to taste these wines. So again, naivety can sometimes be a very good thing, and that's what I decided to do. So what I'd like to do today is take you through a little bit of a history of Malbec. We're not just concentrating on Argentina now, we're just concentrating on Malbec, obviously, and give you a little bit of a history, and then talk some numbers through with you, and then we can go straight into the tasting. So when I was doing my research, I like to make sure that I'm properly researched when I do these events. It's quite hard to come by information about Malbec and its history, but there was one particular gentleman called William H. Beasley, who is professor of history at the University of Arizona, who wrote a piece called Malbec Matters. And in the first paragraph of that piece, he says, Roman emperors, a crusading queen, medieval popes, renowned czars, and perhaps a treacherous wizard were all connected to the growth and the popularity of Malbec. Now, we might think that Malbec now is something that's become very popular around the world as a great variety, but it has a much longer history than that. It's now journeyed its way around the world. We can find Malbec in Chile, the US, Brazil, Canada, of course, much of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the Crimea, Ukraine. But it's Argentina, really, where people come flocking to for trying Malbec. It's Argentina that's become synonymous with this great variety. And it's interesting that there are lots of different styles of Malbec, which is, of course, we're going to be tasting today. But you know, Malbec is made as a white wine. It's made as a rosé wine, which is becoming increasingly popular. It's made as a sweet wine. It's made as a fortified wine, and it's also made increasingly as a sparkling wine too. So if we go way back to the origins of Malbec, then that goes back to the Romans. In France, both Cahors and Tours, once known as Auxerrois, and probably more commonly known now in France as Cotte. When the Romans were in Cahors, they had the city, which was the center of the Quercy province, called Divona. And when we look at the Malbec that is still there, we're looking at the DNA of the plant. We know that its parent was Madeleine Noire de Charente as the mother, and probably, although we're not totally sure, Prune Lard, which gives it some lineage to Merlot as well. So it really became very popular when Eleanor of Aquitaine was the Queen of France, and later to become the Queen of England from 1122 to 1204. And she was a great promoter of the wines from Cahors, and as a result, they became very, very famous and very popular. At that time, the vines were grown in Cahors, in the Pyrenees, and the right bank of Bordeaux. and it became known as the black wine. And it's been known, I know, in the UK as the black wine from Cahors for a very long time. And when she got married to Henry II of England, it then became known as claret. Now, not just claret from Bordeaux, but also claret from Cahors, because half of the exports from Bordeaux at that time were not from Bordeaux, they were from Cahors, and they were Malbec. So it kind of reached its apogee, I suppose, in 1308, when we have records that were 5 million barrels of Malbec were shipped to England from Cahors. And then we have a bit of time where it was not so fashionable, but in the end of the 17th century, the north side of the Gironde River was being drained, and that meant that the Médoc region of Bordeaux was being opened up. And the name Malbec, supposedly, most people think, comes from the fact that Sir M. Malbec, spelt with a K and not with a C. In actual fact, when I first started buying Malbecs from Argentina, many of them were spelt M-A-L-B-E-K or M-A-L-B-E-C-K. So they were still using that reference when they were making wines then. He bought grape shoots from the right bank and planted. And then really we come along to phylloxera. 1853 was when Malbec was brought to Argentina from France, and it must be emphasized that the Malbec that came to Argentina from France was not from Cahors, it was from Bordeaux. So it may well have been a slightly different animal to that of the cot that we still find in Cahors now. And indeed, there have been a few producers in Argentina that have bought the grapes from lot in cot over to Argentina, and they've been very different to the Malbec that we now know in Argentina. But it was introduced. The date 17th of April 1853 is the day that we celebrate Malbec World Day, and that's because Michel Aimé Puget, who was asked by the Chileans to go and bring vine cuttings from France, was invited over to Argentina from Chile by Fausto Sarmiento, who was president in exile in Chile at that time, to take a look at starting what's called the Quinta Normal in Mendoza, which was the wine school. By this time, there were a few thousand hectares in Mendoza, and they wanted to introduce French grape varieties because everything French was extremely fashionable at that time. 1862, of course, or 1863, depending on what you look at it, is where the phylloxera plague wiped out most of the vineyards in Europe over a 10-year period. But Argentina and Chile and Cyprus, I think, are the only countries that were not affected by phylloxera. So the original genetic material that came from France can really only be found there. Towards the end of the 19th century, we had an exponential development of the wine industry in Argentina with the arrival of the British and the trains. That helped to speed up the development of the vineyards and provide a connection between Mendoza in particular, but also San Juan to the north and Patagonia in the south to Buenos Aires, where negotiants would buy the wine in bulk and then sell them in what's called damajuanas, which are big sort of glass pots, to the market. 1959 was when the Institute of National Viticulture in Argentina was formed. So we started to see vineyards being registered by vineyard owners. And at that time, 1962, later when we had that full census, there were 58,000 hectares of Malbec. So this is, there was a lot of Malbec. It was known as the French grape then. It wasn't necessarily known as Malbec. And the first exports of Malbec were in 1974. That was registered to the United States. It took a while after that for them to really start going together. And then 1991, the first DOC in the Americas was formed, and that was the DOC of Luján de Cuyo, which is known as the first zone in Mendoza, more of which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then in 2000, we really started to focus on not just Malbec, because it was becoming more popular. It wasn't as popular as it is today, obviously. But we wanted to look at how we can secure the future of Argentina. And Malbec is a great varietal by looking at the terroirs and the identity. And there was a very, very fast, rapid move towards producing what we call the IGs. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then we decided that we were going to celebrate Malbec World Day in 2011 with some research at 17th of April. And we're now in our 12th year of celebrating Malbec. And I must say, actually, I owe my living to Malbec. I owe everything that I've ever done, really, that's good in my career to Malbec. So it's always a real pleasure for me to celebrate this great varietal. And it also, it's very interesting that in the UK, and I can really only speak from the UK point of view here in terms of what I've done, it's become part of the language. And I think when a grape variety becomes part of the language, it's very interesting. It's part of everyday life. And I think that's securing its success for the future. So let's talk a little bit about numbers. We're going to talk a little bit about the surface area of Argentina first. Okay, so the statistics say that there are 211,000 hectares that are under vine. There are, but only 194,513 hectares are given over to viticulture. The rest are grapes for producing grape must and raisins and table grapes, etc. And if we look at the makeup of the grape varieties, 59% of that is red, which is, obviously Argentina has always been very well known for its red wines. 23% of that, it's 34,000 hectares, are white. And then we have these pink grapes, 23% are pink grapes and 18% are white grapes. Those pink grapes are mostly made up of the local varietals that we call the Criollo varietals, which are a cross of Listan Prieto, which came probably the first grape variety to come to the Americas, and Muscatel de Alejandría, and that spawned a number of what we call local grapes in South America. We call them Criollos in South America. So if we take that Malbec as a split from that, we have 46,336 hectares of Malbec. It's pretty exact because everything has to be registered with the INV, and these are figures from 2021. Interestingly, if we look at the history of that, that is much less than there used to be by the 1960s. As I mentioned before, we had 58,000 hectares. What happened is in the late 70s and the 80s, there was a vine pool scheme. Argentina was in a terrible state financially as a country, and there was a vine pool scheme that encouraged people to take up their vines and replace them with more profitable crops like tomatoes, onions, apples, pears, fruit, etc., etc. So we lost all but just under 10,000 hectares of Malbec. Imagine if we had that now, all this old vine Malbec. There's still plenty of it, but we lost a lot. And in the last 20 years, the surface area of Malbec has grown by 168%. And that's because a number of individuals who were leaders, who were entrepreneurs in Argentina, really took the decision to concentrate on Malbec rather than Cabernet Sauvignon and other great varieties. So there are a few leading figures that made that decision. So If we look at the surface distribution of Malbec, it's not surprising that, well, we all know Mendoza is a huge area of wine production, not just in Argentina, but in the world, that 84% of the surface area of Argentina's Malbec is in Mendoza. And the second largest region, which is San Juan, and we order these, we've ordered these in terms of size. Just 6% is in San Juan. So San Juan is better known for other grape varieties like Syrah because it's pretty hot. So it's not the best climate for Malbec, apart from a couple of regions which are higher in the mountains and much cooler. Salta at 3.55% and La Rioja, Neuquén. These are all the provinces that produce wine in Argentina. So if we look at grape production in 2021, a quintales, by the way, is 100 kilograms of fruit. There were nearly 22 million quintales of fruit picked and processed in Argentina, of which 21 million, of which 4,449,000 were Malbec. So that makes up 20% of the total crush in 2021 and 40.1% of the red wine crush of 2021. So if we look at production, that becomes, for me, a little bit more interesting because this is in terms of elaboration. And just 24% of Mendoza's production is Malbec. And if we go down the list, of course, we're going from Mendoza, which is by far the largest region, to San Juan, which is the second largest, 17% of the whole production at 6.57%. But when you start going to the smaller areas like Salta, La Rioja, Neuquén, Catamarca, the Rio Negro, very small areas of wine production, then Malbec forms a much larger part of their overall production from there. And I think Argentina really needs these regions because they provide so much of a different perspective on the production of Malbec. You know, we are going from north to south in the Andes. We're going from the highest vineyards in the world to the most southern vineyards in the world. So export markets, well, we have to, when we put the export markets into context, really, we're talking about, this has all happened in less than 20 years. Bulk wine is beginning to make its mark. Bulk wine is very new to Argentina. It's not something that's been very well organized in the past, and it's not something that has been very necessary because most of the bulk wine that's made in Argentina serves a very thirsty domestic market. But if we look at the figures, we'll see this is in hectoliters and USD. We're at nearly $489 million with what we call fraction wine, which is bottled wine, and then bulk at 41.5. That bulk is always going to change because that depends on how much availability there is for export and depending on the kind of harvest that they've had. 2019, for example, was a fantastic year for Argentine bulk wine because, number one, they'd managed to get themselves together to go to many different markets with it, and also COVID, which really helped things because they had a ready supply where many countries didn't. So that sort of helped us to put Argentina on the supermarket shelves of the United States, United Kingdom, mostly. United Kingdom is actually the largest buyer of bulk wine in the world from Argentina, and it's not just destined for the United Kingdom. Much of that goes to the Scandinavian markets and to Central Europe as well. So you can see that the big markets for Argentina are United States, United Kingdom, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Netherlands, China, Switzerland, Colombia, and Germany. And the fastest growing markets for Argentine wine and Malbec are South Korea and Poland, which grew by 125% last year. So thank you very much for that. More work to be done, but thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about what we call the GIs. In terms of how we communicate Malbec and how we assure the future of Malbec, this is absolutely essential, the geographical indications. In terms of appellations, these are appellations, but they're not appellations that have any rules and regulations as to regard to what they can grow or how they can make their wines. They're purely geographical, which makes me very happy because it means that we still remain very diverse in our ability to create and produce different styles of wine. Not every region has been given a GI yet, but there are so many regions to put these GIs on, and there are a number of reasons why they haven't been done yet, but many of them will. So when you start looking at the labels of some of these wines, you're going to start seeing these names. So my job, our job, is to ensure that we become familiar with these names because these names are very new onto many of the labels. So Lujan de Cujo, the Ugo Valley, Cavajati, the Calchaquí Valley, all these places are more familiar, but we're now drilling down into these small village, if you like, districts, just like in Burgundy and Bordeaux and the more traditional areas. It's interesting, isn't it, that where the old world is moving more towards a new world approach in labeling wines with grape varieties, for example, the new world is going more towards the old world approach and actually selling their wines less about grape variety and more about regionality. And then I think eventually it'll sort of kind of meet in the end. So, first wine. I'll give you a couple of minutes to get poured. Might be a little surprising to see that we have a white Malbec. I put that on there because I think there are very strong commercial reasons why people might want to carry this, especially on the back of the popularity of Malbec, which I know that in Poland has probably not reached the level that it has done in places like the United States and the UK, but we're hoping that will be the case. And I suppose there is a little bit of a novelty about this, but there are a number of very large producers, some smaller as well, but the large producers are beginning to make white Malbec as part of their sort of Malbec portfolio. In the UK, we see some of this in the supermarkets. We see a lot of Malbec rosés from Argentina in the supermarkets. And of course, we see lots of Malbecs in the supermarkets. And, you know, you can't blame anybody for wanting to capitalize on the popularity of a grape variety. But I think it is always quite interesting, these white Malbecs, because you have this nice kind of red fruit, red crunchy fruit with white fruit. And, you know, not everyone wants to drink red wine. So I think there are a lot of commercial reasons why you might want to do this. This is from Argento. Argento is owned by a group called Avenir that also have white vineyards down in Chubut in the most southern area of Patagonia. And they're pretty young. I mean, they're probably no more than 15 years old as a company. It's owned by a gentleman called Bulgaroni in Argentina, who's is a pretty well-known business entrepreneur. And everything they do is organic. They're one of the largest organic producers in Argentina. They took that decision a few years ago, and now at a point where all of their wines are organic. So rosé is becoming very popular with Malbec, but I think this is another sort of string to Argentina's bow. It's quite an interesting wine. It's an early harvest. It's from a place called Agrelo in Lujan de Cujo, which is the old area, and I'll explain that in a moment with a map. It's filtered before it's fermented, so we get some of the color out, because Malbec, of course, is huge with anthocyanins, and so you just can't make it without doing that. It leaks so much color during skin contact with the must. And it's fermented at 14 to 16 degrees for 28 days, so it's a pretty slow fermentation. 13% alcohol. We're seeing that over the last 10, 15 years, the alcohol levels in these wines are going down, and despite climate change, and that's because producers are picking much earlier than they used to. Of course, there's no oak in making this wine as well. It's quite a commercial wine. And if I can explain to you Mendoza, because all the wines that we're going to be tasting today are from Mendoza. So this is Mendoza City. I hope you can all see the cursor. This is Mendoza City. So if you go towards the left of the screen, we're on a road that's called the Ruta 40, the Route 40, which takes you from Mendoza, if you're going up, all the way into Bolivia, and if you're going down, you're going all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in Patagonia. And this road takes you straight through the vineyard areas. So it's pretty easy when you go to Mendoza. You just drive straight on this road and you go either left or right to the vineyard areas that you need to go to. But we're talking about from northern Mendoza down to the most southern part of Mendoza. You don't see, there's another region to the south of here, which is called San Rafael before we get to Patagonia. We're talking at around 450 kilometers. So it's not something that could be done in a day. Well, it could be, but you'd need to be in a Ferrari or something like that. So that's the Route 40. So if we're going to the west, of course, we're going higher in altitude. And if we're going to the east, we're going lower in altitude. And of course, that has a dramatic effect on the grapes in terms of climate, because we are in a desert. So we have on average around 150 to 250 millimeters of rain a year. The altitude ranges from the east region, which is the lowest at about 650 meters above sea level, to the highest regions up here in places like La Carrera and San Pablo. We go up to around 1,900 and 2,000 meters above sea level. There is actually one in La Carrera, which is at 2,000 meters above sea level. And then we have what's called the Region Central, or the Primera Zona, as it's quite oftenly referred to. And this area is the old area. This was first planted. So we have two, Luján de Cuyo, which is named here, which is the little town which is right on the river, which is the Rio Mendoza. Of course, we can't do this without rivers because they're supplying us with all of our water. A system which was inherited by the Spanish when they arrived from the Inca, and then developed by a number of individuals, one in particular, an Italian engineer called Cipoletti, who arrived in the 19th century, and they started to build on this extremely complex irrigation system that was already there. Much of it still stands. And then if we go from Luján de Cuyo and the zone Maipú and the Luján de Cuyo, the main zone, we then drive about an hour and we are in the Uco Valley. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Uco Valley. Now, what's very important to understand about the difference between these regions is that the Uco Valley does not have any what we call the Precordillera. The Precordillera, the mountain ranges, there are three mountain ranges that are, when you go to Mendoza, you look at all of the kind of ice creams floating in the sky, particularly on very sunny days. The first mountain range here is called the Cordillera Frontal. But here in Luján de Cuyo and Maipú and the first zone, we have something called the Precordillera. And that makes a very big difference to the temperatures, because all of the weather systems and the winds that come down from the mountain, this Precordillera protects this area from the worst excesses of wind and low temperature. Once we get to the Uco Valley, we don't have that Precordillera. We have the frontal here. So we are right up against the mountains in the Uco Valley. And that's one of the reasons why it's so much cooler. Not only do we have higher altitude, but we are actually much closer to the mountains.
Phil, sorry, first comments in chat. I don't know if you see the chat.
Yes.
Okay, very unique wine. We like it. It's Yola. For the first time, we taste white Malbec. A nice wine to start the tasting. I believe that was the comment. And is this wine available, white Malbec, available in Poland?
Well, I think the other big winery that I know that makes this is Trivento. I'm not sure if Trivento are there, but they're a very big winery. That's part of Conchetoro Group in Chile. And so if they're not there, I doubt very much if there is a white Malbec there. And we're hoping that that will change. We're hoping that there will be white Malbec there. And if enough of you shout and scream about it, perhaps that might change things. So yeah, but it's very nice. I mean, there are some people a little bit cynical about it because it's kind of working on the back of the popularity of Malbec, but I think it can stand in its own right. I think it's a very nice, easy drinking wine, something that is a very nice palate cleanser. Before you, yes, you can have the presentation afterwards, no problem. That's all there for you with all the contacts and everything else like that. So yeah, so that's just what I was explaining about all the regions. Now, the other thing, just before I go on to the next wine, is the east of Mendoza is really the powerhouse. You don't see very much here. It doesn't really give a view of how big it is, but it has the same number of hectares of vineyards as Rioja in Spain. I think we're at nearly 58,000 hectares. It's massive, and this is where most of the bulk wine and the wine that is made for the local market is made. And all the tourists that go to Mendoza, often they ignore it. But if you ever find yourself going to Mendoza, I really would recommend you go there, because this is where you see all the old vines. This is where you see all the Criollo varietals. This is where you see the sort of real workhouse element of Mendoza. And there are extremely good wines that come from there as well. So the Luján de Cuyo, Maipú, the Uco Valley, all these places you're going to see on the labels, they're terribly fashionable, but they don't account for a huge amount of volume when compared to the east of Mendoza, where you see names like Rivadavia, San Martin, all these places. We won't see much because they don't export a lot of that from there. But if you ever find yourself in Mendoza, it's a good idea to go there. It's also very green as an area. Okay, so let's go on to our next wine. We're going to start with a
food pairing. Sorry, food pairing for white Malbec. Another question.
I would put that with a nice ceviche. Only because I'm talking about Argentina, and you know, if you're going to be serving that as a wine, I would put that with a ceviche. It has a kind of nice, slightly red, crunchy fruit character to it, as well as the white fruit. So I think also very nice to drink on its own on a hot summer's day too. Yeah, I would put that with some sushi or some ceviche, something that has quite a citric character. So, okay, so we're going to our first wine. We're actually staying in Luján de Cuyo, I was explaining about, and this is by a family called Duriguti, very famous family. We're already beginning to see the Italian influence here. The major influences in Argentina, of course, Spanish, because they were the first to arrive from Europe. And then we have a huge influence from the Italians. And in fact, if you go to Argentina, the majority of the culture is most influenced by the Italian culture and the French culture, which is also, you know, if you go to Buenos Aires, much of the architecture is French. So we have this combination of Spanish, French, and Italian. So this is called Proyecto Las Compuertas. Now, this is quite an important wine because this is looking at the patrimony of Argentina and trying to protect areas that are under considerable pressure from urbanization, where we have old vineyards. If you take the entire vineyard area of Argentina that is being used for the elaboration of wine, as I mentioned, 194,000 hectares, there are 3,000 hectares of vines that are over 80 years old. And one of the areas of Mendoza, which is most famous for Malbec, is an area called Las Compuertas, which is the most westerly part of Luján de Cuyo, which means it's the highest part of Luján de Cuyo, because as we're going west, we're going up into the Andes. And there are a number of producers who are working to, A, capitalize on the fact that we have these very old vines that are over 100 years old. And this is planted in 1914. You know, in Europe, of course, we pull up vines mostly every 30, 40 years. So old vines, you know, a really old vine in Europe is 40 years old. Really old vines here are over 100 years old, and some of them much more. So this area, how would I describe this area in terms? If this area was a car, it would be a Rolls Royce. Opulent, luxurious, mostly expensive wines come from here. You've got people like Cheval Blanc who invested here with to produce what's called Cheval des Andes. They bought an old vineyard next to this one actually, and they produced the Cheval des Andes, which is quite a very expensive for Argentina wine. Yeah, I was just saying that you want a couple of minutes to talk about the white Malbec in your group. Okay, so I'll just keep talking and then you can carry on with tasting this wine. So what's interesting about this wine also is that it's one of those wines that's there's no oak, which I think Argentina is very good for, is producing wines with no oak, particularly Malbecs with no oak. Nothing wrong with oak, but it makes sense. You have enough structure in the wine. You don't need to use oak. And of course, many people, when you're drinking these wines that are so pure in fruit and aromatics, they want wines that really show the grape. And this is one of those. This is one of those wines. So what they've done with this vineyard is something which is very common in Argentina these days, is to separate the vineyard into lots depending on soil structure. Of course, we're in the Andes, so the soils are alluvial, mostly alluvial, and so not only do they change dramatically within a few meters or a few yards, but they're also always changing because we have the action of water, we have the action of wind. Sometimes we get winds coming from Patagonia, which bring with them some soils from Patagonia, also volcanic ash. For example, a few years ago, there was quite a layer of volcanic ash that was put over some of the vines. So they are changing quite a lot over a period of time. The Andes is only a few million years old. It's not that old when you compare to some of the other mountain ranges in the world. So I would always recommend when you're serving Malbec in a restaurant that you're serving it sort of between 15 and 18 degrees. Of course, we know that that's kind of the temperature that you should be drinking red wines, but when these wines are warm, I don't think you get the full kind of aromatic and tannic structure right. So I always pop mine in the fridge for an hour before I drink it, or I take it from my cellar. So they've taken 5 elements from this. They've taken the grapes from 5 different areas of the vineyard that are dominated by limestone or sand or clay or river stones, because we're by the Rio Mendoza here, and rocky soils. They've fermented them separately, small fermentations in concrete eggs, and then they've done the blend so that they can show the whole vineyard area. So just to show you Las Compuertas. Las Compuertas is the most westerly point in Luján de Cuyo, and it's right by the river, which also has a cooling influence. So we're at 1,050 meters above sea level here, but we can't go any higher because we have that pre-cordillera in the way, which is protecting us from all the elements that come down from the mountains. What is the export price for this? Well, that's something that you'd need to, but the retail price for this in the UK is around £20, if that can give you any kind of idea. Of course, we have a different tax structure to you, but yeah, £20 is what you'd be paying for it. So I'd say that's for a independent wine shop, that's that's a kind of slightly more than average price that you would pay, but I think it's still great value for money. So this is also an old vineyard that is high density. When the French came and the Italians came, they used to plant their vineyards quite high in density. So it would be anything from around 7,500 to 10,000 plants per hectare. And later, the fashion was for lower density, at sort of 5,500 plants per hectare, which is pretty average because that's taken into account the water retention of the vineyard too. This was harvested in the first week of March. If you'd have been drinking that wine 15 years ago, this would have been harvested in the second week of April. So people are picking much earlier because they want to show the terroir much more. 4 days of pre-fermentation maceration, which is very common when you're making Malbec in Argentina, and then a further 28 days on the skins, maceration during fermentation, racking off into concrete tanks, and that's it, just some aging in concrete tank and no oak. So Las Compuertas, as I mentioned, is under threat as a region from urbanization. So there are now measures being put in place with these areas to make sure that they maintain these old vines in these old vineyard areas and that are protected. And so developers, when they come in, if they want to buy these areas, have to replant the vines somewhere else, which is so much more expensive than finding a site. So that kind of puts them off. Are we ready for the next wine? Were there any comments about that wine? Did you like it?
Well, let me help you. We like it. Yeah. And someone's writing more comments.
So, as I said, this is a more traditional area. So, the fruit is going to be riper here than the cooler areas of the Uco Valley, which we're going to come on to in a moment. I'm going to explain a little bit about the Uco Valley to you. It's not surprising that these quality wines have no oak. It's a real movement in Argentina. It has been for the last 10, 15 years. When you're picking earlier, we find that we have a much better structure, tannic-wise, and much better aging potential because we have much higher acidity. Yeah, and
about the export price, we're gonna give you the contact to the winery.
Yeah. If you want to go directly to the winery, they can give you pricing. I can't really do that. That's up to them to do that. So, Uco Valley. Okay, we're going south from Luján de Cuyo and Maipú, the first zone, about an hour's drive, along a road called La Picada, which takes you over the Pre-Cordillera and down into this valley. And we're going from north to south here. It's split into 3 different areas. The first one, which has the highest vineyards in the Uco Valley, is called Tupungato. And we have a city called Tupungato there, which is the sort of capital. It's not really a city, it's a little sleepy town. And then we go further through the Uco Valley, we come to the middle area, which is in purple, which is called Tunuyán. Again, there's the town of Tunuyán and all these little IGs in these separate areas. And then we keep going further south, we come into San Carlos. Now, if you take a line here and take a line there, what divides them are 2 rivers. To the south, the river here is called the Rio Tunuyán, which then flows north to the east of Mendoza and provides water for most of the vineyards in the east of Mendoza. If we take this here, this is called the Las Tunas River. So the rivers still are very important because we're in a desert. So this is our source of irrigation. This is our source of water. Drilling for water is no longer allowed because we have global warming, and this could lead to problems in the future. So there is an irrigation department in Argentina. You have a minister for irrigation. It's a very important part of life there. I used to run a vineyard in Mendoza, in Luján de Cuyo, and where you have what's called rights to water. If you are near these rivers, you have a legal right to that water, but that water is rationed to you on a weekly basis, and you can take a certain amount of water for a certain amount of time, and that's it. So this is where you have the traditional furrow irrigation, which is more in the old area, but in the new areas like this, where we have much more rocky soils, less deep soils, furrow irrigation or flood irrigation doesn't make sense, because the water just kind of seeps through and drains away. Of course, we've got great drainage here. We've got very poor soils, less than 2% organic matter. So drip irrigation, which is really has made the expansion of the Uca Valley possible. If not, you wouldn't be able to see the expansion that we've seen here. And it's been a lot of investment in this region. However, you are not going to see many more regions appear unless you're going up into the west, that is higher into the mountains. So these areas, these areas are become colder and colder. So Argentina, if it's expanding, is either going south to Patagonia, is going to the west, higher into the mountains, where we have more water available, or north, where we're going much higher into the mountains and cooler. So that's really where we see that. So we're going from north to south. This covers a distance of around 250 kilometers. So it's a pretty big valley. And you can see here that we've got all these little IGs. Some of them are IGs, but they're all districts, villages here. So that's just explaining the Uca Valley. Okay, so the wines that we're going to be tasting from here are going to go from north to south along the Uca Valley. So basically from high to low. But we need to remember something. In combination with altitude, we have latitude. So as you're going from north to south, we're getting cooler from latitude, because as we're going further south, we're getting cooler temperatures. So you might have, for example, Paraqui Altamira here, which is at 1,050 to 1,150 meters above sea level, at cooler temperatures than some parts of Hualtajari here, which is the highest area, as well as La Carrera in the Uca Valley. And that's because the mountain follows here. Okay, so we're close to the mountain. There's not much higher you can go here because we're so close to the mountain. That makes sense, I guess. Okay, the next wine. Okay, so we talk about Malbec. What does Malbec blend particularly well with? The tradition in Argentina was always to blend Malbec with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, a sort of more Bordeaux than Bordeaux blend, because of course Bordeaux doesn't have much Malbec left. I think there's about 30 hectares left of Malbec. Most of it was wiped out in 1959 with a ice storm. That it's very sensitive to cold temperatures. Malbec. So this is a blend of 60% Malbec, 30% Cabernet Franc, and 10% Cabernet Sauvignon. The rules in Argentina with regards to what you label the wine as say that as long if you have 85% of the blend is Malbec, then you can just call it Malbec. You can add Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Petit Verdot, whatever you like, but it must be at least 85% of the wine. However, once you go below 85%, you then have to start putting the other grape varieties on there. But it's not necessary to put the grape varieties in the blend on the label. But if you do, you then have to correctly label it. So what they've done in this instance is they called it a Malbec Cabernet Franc blend, because that's the essence of the blend. This is from a district called El Parral in Tupungato, which is the first region you come to as you're coming south from Luján de Cuyo. This is made by Estela Perinetti, That's the name, Las Estelas. She's very famous in Argentina. She was one of the first women winemakers to make their mark. Before that, there weren't many. You have people like Susana Balbo and herself, but now we have loads and loads of women. So they kind of paved the way for women winemakers in what you could probably fairly say was quite a male-orientated business 25 years ago. Things have changed massively since then. She's worked with Catena, one of the very famous names in Argentina. She's also worked with Escorihuela Gascon as a winemaker, and she was winemaker and still is winemaker at Bodegas Caro, which is a joint partnership between Catena and Rothschild in Bordeaux. So it's not unusual to find winemakers who make wines for wineries having their own projects. They're a family that have been there for a long time. They own their own vineyards and they make their own wines too. And I think that's quite important for the industry, because what that does is that I think it allows winemakers to express themselves in different ways. You know, if you work for Catena, then you really do have to work to a system. If you have your own vineyard, you're free to do what you want. And I think that means that we have a very strong diversity and a lot of innovation that happens in winemaking. Yeah, Cab Franc for me is the great variety that should be blended with Malbec. Also, I think Petit Verdot, but in small amounts. But over the years, it was always, you know, with the top blends that have all got the sort of 100 points from Parker or whoever, they've all been Malbec Cabernet Sauvignon. But Malbec Cabernet Franc for me, I think is something that I find that Cabernet Franc, the little greenness, gives a bit more energy to Malbec. I like to blend. I've blended wines from Argentina when I was at Gaucho, and I always really liked the energy of Cabernet Franc with Malbec. It gives a little bit more sort of oomph. Cabernet Franc from Argentina. Well, Jancis Robinson a while ago said that Argentina is making the best Cabernet Franc in the world at the moment. Who am I to disagree? Particularly from the Uco Valley. I think that Malbec and Cabernet, I think that's a really clever blend. Anybody have any questions about that? Price-wise, this wine would be a little less than the one we have, about 18 pounds in the UK market. So it's a slightly lower price, depending on how hard you bargain with her, of course. And that's the only, this is the only wine that has other grape varieties in there that have any significance. All the rest are going to be Malbec. Okay, so just to let you know where El Paral is, Tupungato, which is this area here, to the north of the Uco Valley. You have the Las Tunas River here, and we're just right by the Las Tunas River. It's an area that doesn't have an IG yet, but it will do. It is an area where we do have some old vines too. Okay, so just a little note about that. So she might choose to put on the label that it's from El Paral, Tupungato, Uco Valley, Mendoza. Or she might choose to put Tupungato, Mendoza. So when you see the label, you know that the grapes are from the district of Tupungato, but they could be from any number of districts in Tupungato. But these days, winemakers are becoming much more precise with the way they label the wines. I think there's a little bit of a reticence on the part of some winemakers to do that, because the belief is that the consumer is not really going to have much of a kind of knowledge of that. But I think if we do this now, it prepares us for the future. Probably long past when I've gone, but it's something we're all working towards. Okay, we're ready for the next wine. Over on a Pinot. Very nice. Cab Franc indeed. Brings some energy and lighter vibes to it. Clever to mix with Malbec. For me, it is the grape variety and Petit Verdot too. And also we bring a nice bit of acidity too. And most of the Cabernet Franc that's been planted in the last few years, in 2002, there were just, I think it was just 200 hectares of Cabernet Franc, some of which was actually very old, bought by Amy Pouget in 1853. But in recent years, most of the plantings of Cabernet Franc have been planted in the Uco Valley. Well, we now have, I think, just over 2,000 hectares in Argentina. It's not a lot, but I think it provides, we see a lot of single Cabernet Francs, but we'll see a lot more. Okay, next wine. This is from Wild Tajari. Okay, now when you're in a restaurant, if you're not familiar with Argentina and you're a sommelier and you see Wild Tajari on a list, there is a chance that some people might be put off ordering a wine because they can't pronounce it. We all know that with sommeliers, we've been hopefully in restaurants and we know what it's like to walk a floor, and people do not order wines that they can't pronounce. And this is a real problem for some of the names that we have from these regions. Wild Tajari for me is a region that we're going to see a lot more of because this is where what I call a Grand Cru area. This is where some of the real top super quality is coming from. You have Adriana Vineyard from Catena, for example, is up here. So it's pronounced Wild Tajari. Just think of someone called Walter and someone called Gary and just put them together, Wild Tajari. I mean, it's kind of, took me a couple of years to learn that, but I think if we start learning how to pronounce them, it becomes much more part of the language. And if you can't do that, Tupungato is fine. Tupungato, by the way, is an Indian word for balcony to the stars, which is always, I find these words quite interesting because they're in the Indian language. This is from Finca Sardinia. There is a gentleman who had a very big producer in Carcassonne in France called Bousquet, who went to Argentina in the late 80s, and he went up to Wild Tajari and he saw the potential there. He came home like a man possessed, told his wife and family, we're leaving, and it was literally like that, sold everything and came and bought a lot of land quite cheaply up in Wild Tajari, and then started his own winery project, but also sold off bits of that land to producers that wanted to come up here. So he's done very well from it. But this is, you know, some of the entrepreneurs that came here and started planting here must be, smoking big fat cigars, because this is an area which I think is going to be one of the most famous areas of Argentina. There's just 10% oak in this wine. It's from 21. Again, look at the alcohol. You know, it's not high, 13.5%. 10% used oak. Again, that's just that little bit of oak to give the fruit some support. And we're at 1,250 meters above sea level. Quite often, wineries will have consultants that work with them just to give them a second view. People like Michel Roland, Alberto Antonini, Attilio Pagli, people like that have done very well with doing consulting work in Argentina. But the consultant here is actually the first winemaker that came here, who was under the tutelage of Michel Roland, called Matthias Michelini, who's, along with his brothers, have become very famous as the kind of new rock and roll winemakers of Argentina. Started a whole kind of biodynamic and organic movement there, and he's very well known now. And they also produce great Chardonnay, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc. They're particularly well known for because Matthias Michelini is kind of Mr. Sauvignon Blanc in Argentina, and it's owned by a gentleman called Roberto Luca, who runs it as well. So this is, for the money, this is a wine that would retail for about 11, 12 pounds in the UK. So we're just a little bit above entry level. Wouldn't find this in the supermarkets, but value for money from this area, I can't believe what brilliant value for money this provides. And it's because they own their own vineyards. So I'll tell you a little bit about Huerta Jari in Tupungato. So this is Tupungato here. In the middle, you have Tunojan, and to the south, you have San Carlos. So Huerta Jari goes from around 1,000 meters above sea level up to 2,000 meters. So we have a kind of similar temperature difference between Burgundy and Tuscany in one area that would take you 45 minutes to drive from east to west. So when we talk about this area, it's very easy to start saying, well, wines from here are like this, but actually we have a lot of differences between the bottom part and the top part. So I think in the future, we'll start to see this area being broken down into sub-regions, like Monastero, for example, which we think that could be, because we have a lot of chalk here. And yeah, so there's a huge amount of diversity in this region, in all these regions, but you know, in this one in particular, because it's so big. Anyone have any comments about that? Do you mind, Natalia? I'll give you 2 minutes to discuss within your group. But I think, you know, they make fantastic wines. That is a great value for money, Malbec. It has, for me, a lot more complexity than some of the supermarket wines you'll find. This belongs, for me, in a restaurant by the glass and in an independent wine shop.
Well, let's make a small break now, and I'd like to encourage the male part of the attendees, as this is very feminist. You know, all the comments are coming from the ladies. So, guys, do not ask only about how much is it or available on the market. Just say something, please. Yeah.
None of the wines that you're tasting at the moment are available in the market.
Okay.
Hopefully they will be, but they're not. Whenever we do these tastings, we try and bring you new wines that you've not tasted before, so that you can get another. You know, Argentina has 895 wineries and about 3,000 projects. So there's a huge amount of diversity. It is the 5th largest wine producer in the world. And there's an awful lot of new things happening, which is why I try to bring. This is why it's such a pain for poor old Peter and Sandra at the embassy, because we're having to bring these samples over from Argentina instead of bringing them from the market. But I do believe it's important that when we do these tastings that we are providing you with wines that show you what's going on in Argentina rather than what's already in the market. A food pairing with red meat, most definitely. And you know what? Chocolate. Since it's all the ladies that we're talking about, chocolate and Malbec for me. I used to do a lot of chocolate and Malbec tastings when I was in London. And yeah, I just love the texture of this Malbec with chocolate. Cheese, yes, most definitely. I'm not an expert on Polish cheeses, but something like a soft cheese would be good. And also a blue cheese. So maybe a Stilton or a Gorgonzola, something like that would be really good. Okay. So we're going to go further south. We're now going to go to an area that we call Tunujan and a place called Vista Flores. Now, when I first started going to Argentina in '99, when I was visiting these areas, I started thinking about what the differences between the Malbecs were in these areas. And when I was teaching staff, I had 1,200 staff that I was teaching on a regular basis. We had our own training program for the staff. And most of those staff had no real knowledge of wine. So we had to start putting together a system by which, if they were going to be explaining, I didn't have sommeliers. Well, I had 2 sommeliers that helped me. but all my staff were sommeliers. So we had to sort of find a system of explaining to people the difference between all these Malbecs, because I had a Malbec list with 100 Malbecs from different areas of Argentina. And one of the easiest ones for me was Vista Flores, because Vista Flores means view of flowers. And the reason for that is because it's very famous for its flower production there, roses. There's a place next door called Colonia Las Rosas. Vista Flores is a pretty big area of the Uco Valley. It's in the middle of the Uco Valley. It's one of the older areas of the Uco Valley, and it's between two rivers, the Tunajan and the Las Tunas, as I said before. These guys, Estancia Mendoza, are part of a very big cooperative group in Argentina, and called Fecovita. They export all around the world. Mostly to begin with bulk wines, but now they're going into the Uco Valley. You don't go into the Uco Valley to produce bulk wines. It doesn't make economic sense. You only go up there to produce high quality wines. So this is for a few years they've been going up here with the brand name Estancia Mendoza. This has been 6 months in American oak. Again, very commonly a pre-fermentation maceration here. 6 months in American oak. Now, I'll leave it up to you whether you like American oak or French oak with these wines. A lot of producers use American oak. A lot of them don't use oak. And, of course, a lot of them are using French oak. But you have to consider that oak is very expensive if you're an Argentine. You've got pesos. The peso is losing value all the time. You're buying in dollars. And when you're buying from France and buying from most of the big tonnelleries in France have outposts in Argentina as well, where they're putting together barrels. Taranto, people like that, they're very well established there. But most the use of new oak, which used to be the craze 10, 15 years ago, is now on the wane. People want to use much less oak. They want to use used oak. They want to hold back and dial back on the oak. Because they're picking earlier, we have more freshness, we have more vibrancy in the wine. Vista Flores. How would you describe Vista Flores? For me, flowers, violets, lavender on the nose, this lovely sort of very purple colour in the wine. Extremely floral. So I always said to my staff, if you're going to explain Vista Flores, just explain flowers. Violets, lavender, roses. That's what I get. But also great structure in the mouth, you know. The tannins are not as fine as places like Huerta Jari. They tend to be a little more firm, the tannins, but of course that's great for... Now, I've just had a question. What's the influence of climate change in Argentina? That's a great question. Okay. I've been going there 23 years, and I've normally gone twice a year. I've gone during harvest in March, April, and then in November, October, November. October, November is my favorite time to go because winemakers have time to see you and talk to you and take you through the fermenting or the fermented wines from tank and from barrel. I always look at the mountains when I come in because you know that in Mendoza you have the highest mountain range in the western and the southern hemisphere. You have Aconcagua. We go up to nearly 7,000 meters here, and you look at the amount of snow on the mountains and the water that the vineyards receive comes from the melting snow in the Andes Mountains. So if you haven't had a cold winter, or if you're not getting snow on the mountains, you don't have any. Much of water, and that's why we need to ration that water. So what has been warming temperatures? No doubt about it. We have warming temperatures in the Andes, even though that's why we're going higher into the mountains to escape that. At times, less water and also more hail. Hailstones are something that is always going to be suffered in mountain ranges. And if you're stuck in a hailstorm in Mendoza, you'll know about it because the hailstorms are about the size of golf balls. Nobody drives nice cars there because it's not worth it. They're all old cars because cars get battered by the hailstorms, and they can be very violent, very quick, and very destructive. And every year, Argentina loses between 10 and 20% of its crop to hail. And whether you get it or not is purely down to luck, or not luck, as the case may be. This is old oak that they've used. Yes, it's not new oak. It's old oak. But I find that American oak tends to give that sort of sweet. You've just said that like a little bit of sweet syrup from the pharmacy. That might be that sort of American oak, sort of coconutty, sweet, syrupy character that you might get in the wine. But you can definitely see a difference between French and American oak in these wines. Definitely. I just know straight away whether it's American. American tends to be a little bit sweeter, particularly in Malbec. It manifests itself. So this is Vista Flores. Very recognizable. Any comments about that? During the 1990s, late 80s and 90s, yeah, it's much more aggressive than the previous one. It's not as fine. I think that's the tannins, and it's a little bit more challenging for clients. But if you stick down a big fatty piece of beef or meat, that should go with it. I think, yeah, it is. I find that Vista Flores can give quite an aggressive palate as well. It also depends on how much they've extracted when they've made the wine. Michel Rolland, the Delan family, Le Gravier Bar-Latique, people like that, put a lot of investment into this region in the late 80s, early 90s. People like Kloster Siete, for example, who are pretty well known. So there's a lot of French influence here. Okay, so just to show you where we are, Vista Flores, very large area in between the two rivers in Tunuyán. And probably the most famous area of Tunuyán. Also, a little bit above here, we have an area that's quite new called Los Chacajes, which is becoming sort of like Huerta Jari, one of those kind of Grand Cru areas where the cool kids are hanging out and making sort of kind of very austere rock and roll wines from there. So, next, we're going to stay in Tunuyán, but we're in a place called Los Árboles. This is my friend Mauricio Loca. It's Poetico Malbec. Mauricio came to the Uco Valley about 20 years ago, where he decided he wasn't going to be a doctor at university and studied winemaking. He worked for a number of years with Catena and Luigi Bosco and some of the big names there. He now has his own winery and his own projects, like many of them do, which is keeping everything so nice and diverse. And Los Árboles is one of those areas that is kind of under the radar. It's quite high in altitude. We're at 1,250 meters above sea level. And interestingly, we have quite a lot of rain here for Mendoza. Remember that we're in a desert, so we have 150 to 250 millimeters of rain a year. But sometimes we can have a lot more rain in this region, and on occasion, Mauricio has dry farmed his vineyards. He's not had to use any irrigation. The soils are extremely poor, very stony, and full of calcium carbonates, like so many of the other areas of the Uco Valley. This is put in 12 months in used oak. Again, it's not new oak. Mauricio, for me, is one of the pioneers of unoaked wines. He has a range of wines called Opalo, which are just all about purity of fruit and the place. Los Árboles has yet to get an IG. It will do. It'll only be a matter of time. But this, for me, is softer. It's gentler than the Vista Flores, the previous wine that we had. Also, he's using French oak. He's not using American oak. And this is also a little older. So we've got 2018 here. 18 was such a beautiful vintage. Now, one of the things we're going to start noticing from Argentina as well is when it comes to these higher premium wines, and this is a wine that would retail at about 30, 35 pounds in the UK. When we start getting these, we start to see variation in vintages a lot more because the fruit is less ripe, they're picking earlier. It's more about picking by plot and by soil type, so they're much more precise in the way that they're made. And so we're going to start seeing some vintage variation, and a lot more than you would expect that you would have done, let's say, 10, 15 years ago when many of the grapes are very ripe. You know, when you're picking overripe grapes, you don't get any terroir and you don't get any vintage variation because they're ripe, phonologically ripe. So, yeah, I love what he does. I love this wine. I mean, what do you think? How does it differ from the previous one from the area? I think it's less aggressive. It's very concentrated, of course, as a wine, as you'd expect at this level, but much more gentle and very pure. Don't forget to take the photos. I guess you're not talking to me. Yeah, it's more rounded. Yeah, much more rounded than the previous one. The less aggressive tonnage, much rounded. Of course, we have a little bit of age. Can these wines age? Yes, they can, and they do, which you're about to find out with the next wine. So, just to show you where Los Árboles is, again, we're high up here, so we're just coming into the Cordillera Frontal, as I was explaining. We're right next to the mountain. Now, Los Árboles is a word that refers, it's called the trees. It translates as the trees. Something else that we find in Argentina is the use of trees, these Los Árboles trees that surround the vineyards. And these are totally necessary to the production of wine in Argentina because they protect the vineyards from the wind. So everywhere you go in Mendoza, you will see vineyards surrounded by these trees. And this is also particularly the case when you go down to Patagonia because it's a very, very windy area, Patagonia. You see all these Los Árboles trees around the vineyards. So that gives the impression, of course, that it's extremely green, the place. But remember, we are in a desert, so it's very dry. So, yeah, Los Árboles, the trees. We need those trees to keep everything from blowing away, basically. Okay, so ready for the next one. Right, this is it's a very famous wine, Acheval Ferrer. Small boutique producer started by a gentleman called Santiago Acheval and a winemaker called Roberto Cipresso and Attilio Pagli from Tuscany. Santiago is Argentine, the others are from Tuscany, and very famous winemakers from Tuscany. And this is a vineyard that they bought, which was abandoned in Paraje Altamira, which now has its own IG in San Carlos, to the south of the Uco Valley. They bought this in the mid-90s, and their first, they bought the vineyard back to life, and their first vintage was in 1999. And when it came to be exported, and that's the business they were in exporting most of what they produced, very small quantities, it caused a bit of a stir. It was one of those wines that kind of really put Argentina on the map, and I think it actually broke a record for the lowest ever yield from a vineyard. They were getting one bunch from 2 or 3 vines, so it was now they're getting like 1 ton per hectare, which is still nothing in terms of yield. Ridiculously low yields. Very, very old vines from 1950 when it was planted, and they released this wine, and well, they started getting scores for it when these people like Parker started putting scores to Argentine wine, which is a very recent thing also. But I think one of the things from here is that we are all about limestone here. It dominates also volcanic deposits, and this is an old area of wine production in the Uco Valley. There are vineyards that were planted before 1900, and there are vines that were planted before 1900 here. So we have some older areas, but this has been one of the areas where all the cool kids are hanging out, and they're starting to produce here. It's very trendy. It had its own IG just a few years ago, and it was the first IG to be given on the basis of soil. So when you think of Paraque Altamira, you think of chalk. The limestone dominates. This is from 2016, so it has a bit of age. And well, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Can Malbec age? Yes, it can and does. Remember that pre-1862 phylloxera, 60% of all the vines in Bordeaux were Malbec. And the Malbec that came to Argentina was from Bordeaux. So yes, it can age and does age, particularly with the presence of chalk. That's my experience of tasting these wines. I age these wines downstairs in my cellar, such small that it is. But I find that these wines can be stored away and forgotten about for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, and they will be absolutely fantastic. Yes, we do have a contact list, and that contract list, the price for the Lorca, the price retail would be around £30. This one would be around £50-60, the one that you're trying now. So it's very premium for Argentina, but when you compare that to a £50-60 wine from Burgundy, it's a bargain. Yeah, you like it. Yeah, the contact list is at the back, so you'll have it all for you. So, yeah, this is a very famous wine in Argentina. It's one of the icon wines, like Catena Zapata and El Amigo, and some of these wines, names that you will see. Very famous wine maker, Roberto Cipresso, who likes to pick early and beat the hell out of the fruit with lots of délestage. So he likes to age the wines. This has been aged 100% in new French oak. So again, no expenses spared with this wine. And yeah, it's a proper fine wine from Argentina and very famous. Okay, so San Carlos. So right here, we're right at the bottom of the Uco Valley. So actually, we're not very high. We're 1,050 to 1,150 meters above sea level. But as I mentioned, we had the chalk, and we can't go any higher here because we are bang next to the mountain. You're there, and then you go like this. So you're not going to get any areas that are planted higher here because you just can't. It can't go any higher because the mountains are too steep. So temperature-wise, this is actually cooler than Huerta Jardí here. And that's because we're going further south and we are much closer to the mountain. Yeah, and we are next to a place called La Consulta, which is completely different to Altamira because we don't have the presence of so much chalk. But this is an area that is quite old. It's quite an old part of the Uco Valley. So it's the most southerly part of the Uco Valley. Okay, so staying in Paraque Altamira, we have Susana Balbo. Susana Balbo, I've been working with Susana for years. When I was at Gaucho, a formidable lady. She has a PhD in chemistry. She decided to go into winemaking at a time when it was completely dominated by men. She graduated from university. She got her first job up in Salta in the north of Argentina and set about changing everything for that region. She changed the way Torontos was made. She changed when it was picked. People listen to her. You have no choice. If you ever meet her, you'll know that she's a very formidable lady. She's a brilliant winemaker. For me, what I love about what she does is that she makes wines with incredible elegance. She's a very elegant lady herself. This is aged for 13 months in 30% new, 70% used oak. She only uses French oak. She only uses the best. She spends a lot of money. She's a brilliant blender. Yeah, and she's a brilliant businesswoman too. She has vineyards in Agrelo, in Luján de Cuyo. She also has a hotel. She also has a restaurant. Her whole family, it's a real family business. Like so many of the wineries that I'm showing you today, they are family businesses. And it's from Paraque Altamira. And she started now using, like everybody else, she started putting these wines and discovering what makes Paraque Altamira different from Hualtajarí, different from Vista Flores, different from Los Árboles. And they're now beginning to see a pattern. She's put 4% Merlot in here. She always blends another great variety, 4 or 5%, either Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, or Merlot, into her Malbecs to give some extra complexity and some nuance. And, well, this is a very refined wine. And a question, are there many organic wine producers in Argentina? Yes. Accredited, there will be more. We have, I think, 68 vineyards in Argentina that are fully organic, which is it's around 15,000 hectares of organic. Most producers, most great producers, produce their vines organically. Why? Because we have very few pests here. We don't have any mold, we don't have any mildew, and if we do get a lot of rain, then they generally will leave the grapes on the vines and won't pick, which is very, very rare, once every 20, 25 years. We don't have any pests here. The Uco Valley in particular has no diseases at all, because it is an area that is protected with very stringent hygiene rules. So when you come in and out of the Uco Valley, you can't bring any livestock, you can't bring any fruits, you can't, they search you, it's completely clean. So yeah, and certification takes 3 years, as you know, and lots and lots of people are going certified. I think a lot of that's to do with demand from the Scandinavians and Europeans. When they are placing wines on their lists, there's more and more a demand for organic wines. There are 7 producers producing biodynamic wine, and in terms of natural wines, there are a few. I'm not sure that it's something that will particularly catch on in Argentina. There are a few natural wine producers there. Do they travel well from Argentina? That remains to be seen. But yes, anyway, what I would recommend you guys do is, after I've stopped boring you stupid, is to actually go back over the wines and taste them again. Firstly, because they will have opened up a little bit. And secondly, you can sort of start seeing those differences together and doing that in your own way. But yes, so I've taken you basically from central Mendoza down to the south. And as we've been going down, we've been getting kind of cooler. So hopefully you've seen a little bit of that as well in terms of temperature. Yeah. And that's all the wines. So if you have any questions or you have anything, I'll just to show you basically that I'm true to my word. These are all the contacts that you have. So you'll get sent that by Peter. He'll send you, there's all the contacts on there if you want to contact the wineries, or you want any more information, or if you want to start importing them or buying them, they'll have all that information for you. And yes, thank you. Questions, please. Well, which wines need decanting most? I think that's a personal choice. Personally, I don't like decanting these wines. Why? Because if I'm drinking them for pleasure or with food, I like to see the evolution of the wine from when you pull the cork or unscrew it to the end of the bottle. That's what I like. I like to see evolution in a wine, and you will get evolution in all these wines. Which one, if there's any one wine I would decant here, it would be the Acheval Ferrer, Finca Altamira. That's what I would.
Well, some comments. Yes, it was one of the most professional. Yeah, I do agree. And
great value for money. Well, yeah. I mean, do you know? Well, Poland grew by 125% last year from pretty much nothing for Argentina, and you've now overtaken Finland. If you want to get a bit competitive about it, overtaken Finland in terms of imports of Argentine wine. So hopefully that will keep going. But it's great that that's why I want to show you new wines. That's every time we do this, I want to show you new stuff because we need to. There are going to be wines in the market now that you'll be able to access, but we need to be able to convey to you that there's so much more as well, and new wines and new opportunities both for Argentina and yourselves. Please share the presentation. It's all there. You send it to you. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed it as well, because that's what we're in the business of doing, enjoying wine.
Well, this was the best presentation out of 3 you did, Phil.
I need practice.
And the next time in person, yeah.
Next time I'm definitely coming in person because I want to see, I want to engage with you about the wines and have a chat with you and do it in person. So I'd love to be able to see you and meet you in person.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, go away, enjoy the wines, taste them together, have a chat about them. If you have any questions, my email is here. If you need anything from me, please ask me directly. My email's there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was worth Peter's hair loss from tearing it out with all the importation of these samples. Yeah, thank you very much. And if you need to know anything, please let me know. No question is too stupid. I always used to say that to my staff.
Well, great. Thank you, Phil. Thank you all. And let's hope to meet you in person pretty soon, right?
Yeah, let's do that.